I remember the sound of the river that day more than anything. Not the gunfire that came later. Not even the baby's cry. Just the river. Rushing, swollen from days of rain, churning like it was trying to wash the whole world clean. He was out there alone, Elias Mercer, a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in months, who hadn't smiled in years. The storm had torn through the land like it was angry at God himself, and he'd gone out like always to check his fence line. But that day, the storm left him something else. Or maybe someone. She was lying face down in the mud, her dress soaked, her body barely breathing. But it wasn't the blood on her forehead that made him stop cold. It was how she held the child. Even unconscious, her arms were wrapped around that baby like a fortress. That baby, tiny, quiet, still alive. Elias froze in his saddle, staring. And in that terrible silence, he remembered. The way his wife had screamed in labor. The way their son had come into the world already gone. And the way Elias had sworn right there in the blood and the straw that he'd never love again. But life doesn't always keep its promises, especially not out here. Something cracked inside him as he dismounted, boots sinking into the riverbank. He could have ridden away. God knows he'd done it before. But this woman, this baby, they looked like ghosts come to haunt him. Or maybe, just maybe, they were something else. Something closer to a second chance. He reached out hands, trembling voice unused to tenderness. "Ma'am," he said. No answer. Just the baby's fingers grasping weakly at his coat, like they already knew. This time he wasn't going to walk away. Back then, Elias Mercer didn't believe in miracles. Didn't believe in God either, not after what happened to Sarah. He'd built that cabin with his bare hands, every log soaked in sweat and silence. Tucked against a hillside, far enough from the nearest town that even rumors got tired before reaching him. That's how he liked it. No visitors, no questions, no memory strong enough to break the surface. Sarah had loved the sound of the wind in the cottonwoods. Said it reminded her of lullabies. Said their boy would grow up hearing the world sing. But he never got to hear a thing. She'd bled out trying to bring him into the world. And Elias had sat there useless, holding their stillborn son in one arm, cradling Sarah in the other, whispering promises into two sets of ears that would never listen again. After that, the world went quiet. He stopped going into town, stopped taking contracts, stopped answering letters. Folks said he'd gone half mad. Maybe he had. But in that cabin, Elias told himself he'd built something stronger than grief, solitude. Order. Control. No pain could touch him if no one ever got close again. And then came that storm. The kind that bends trees in half and rattles windows from their frames. He was out by the East Ridge when he saw her, the girl by the river. He didn't know her name yet. Just mud and blood and silence, and that baby cradled like the only thing still worth living for. He should have walked away. He'd told himself that 1,000 times since. But instead, he carried her. She was feather-light in his arms, her dress clinging wet to a frame far too thin for a woman her age. The baby barely made a sound, just the faintest breath against his collarbone, like a secret trying not to be heard. Elias laid them both across his saddle and led the horse home on foot. The rain never let up. It soaked him clean through, but he never felt it. Not really. He only felt the weight of something unfamiliar hope. Or maybe it was fear. He wasn't sure anymore if there was even a difference. Back at the cabin, everything looked smaller. The walls he'd once trusted to keep grief out now felt like a prison made of memory. He placed her gently on his bed, the only bed. the one he hadn't slept in since Sarah. She didn't stir. The baby whimpered once, and Elias, out of instinct or desperation, pulled the tiny thing to his chest. He hadn't held anything so small since that awful night 2 years ago. His hands trembled like they had then. But this time, there was breath. This time the child was warm. He wrapped him in one of Sarah's old quilts and whispered something he hadn't said out loud in years. "You're safe." He didn't know who he was talking to, the baby, the girl, or himself. Later, when the fire was going and the storm softened to a hush, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, green, clear, but frightened like a deer expecting the shot. Her hand flew to the child beside her. Elias moved to reassure her, but she flinched, every movement full of pain. "It's all right," he said, voice rough from disuse. "He's okay. You're both okay." She blinked at him, confused, like the words didn't fit the world she'd just woken into. Then her voice, faint, rasping, came out, like wind scraping stone. "He's not mine, but he's all I've got." And just like that, Elias knew. This wasn't just a stranger he'd pulled from the river. This was a woman who'd already lost everything and still chose to protect something not even her own. He'd seen that kind of love once before, and it had broken him. Now it was asking quietly, unexpectedly, if he was ready to be whole again. By morning, the rain had turned to mist. The river shrank back into its bed, sullen and muddy, as if it had done something it couldn't take back. Elias stood at the window, coffee cooling in his hand. Behind him, the fire crackled low, and from the bed came the slow, uncertain breath of a woman not quite asleep. The baby Samuel, she'd whispered in the night, was curled against her side, wrapped in the last dry quilt in the house. Elias hadn't slept. He'd sat in the chair across from her for hours, watching her chest rise and fall, waiting for the questions to outnumber the silence. They came with the sunrise. "How long was I out?" she asked without opening her eyes. "Almost a day." She sat up too fast, winced, pressed a hand to her ribs. "The baby, he's fine." Elias turned toward her. You need rest." Mara looked down at Samuel and breathed a trembling sigh. "I wasn't sure we'd make it." "You almost didn't." He hesitated. "You want to tell me what you were doing out there?" She looked at him, then really looked. Not just at the man who'd pulled her from the mud, but at the grief sitting heavy in his eyes. As if something about the storm in her had found shelter in the storm in him. "There's a man," she said. "Name's Jebediah Crane. Owns the inn in Whetstone Pass." Elias knew the name. Everyone around these parts did. A man with money in every vice from Amarillo to the northern hills. Gambling women, freight. But there were rumors darker than any saloon whisper dared carry. "I worked there," Mara continued. "As a cleaner at first. Then he started giving me shifts upstairs. Told me if I didn't like it, I could leave." Her voice dropped. But he knew I had nowhere to go. Elias didn't speak. The silence between them thickened like smoke. Then a woman came through. Mara said. Young, traveling alone, pregnant. Her name was Elise. She only stayed 2 nights. On the 3rd, she died. Childbirth. "No," Mara said, her jaw tightening. "Murder." The word hit the air like a crack of gunfire. She found out what he was doing, selling babies. Healthy infants, no questions asked, to people with coin and shame. She told me, said she was going to the sheriff. Jebediah made sure she never got that far. Elias set his coffee down and fingers curling. "She made me promise," Mara whispered. "If anything happened, take Samuel and run. You're not his mother." "No," she said softly. But I became his the moment she stopped breathing. and I've been running ever since. Outside, a gust of wind swept down the valley, stirring the frost-bitten leaves against the cabin wall. Elias's cabin had weathered storm's fire drought and 2 winters so cruel they split fence posts in half. But none of it had ever walked up to his door like this. Why here, he asked. Didn't know where else to go. Heard from an old trader there was a man up this way who lived alone, took no visitors, asked no questions. She looked at him, chin trembling, but eyes steady. I gambled that made you kind. He didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong. And that scared him more than the story she told. Later that day, while she slept again, too weak to stay awake long, Elias saddled his horse and rode a wide loop through the trees above his cabin, just to make sure no one had followed. But before he returned, he saw them. Tracks, fresh. 4 horses. Riders. Coming from the south from Whetstone's direction. They'd stopped at the river where he'd found her, waited there a while, then turned toward the trees, not back the way they came, toward him. He got back to the cabin with dusk breathing down his neck, lit no fire, made no sound, just watched from the window as the last light died. Mara woke to the quiet. She sat up, saw him by the door. What is it? They're coming. He didn't say how many. He didn't need to. Her face went white. Her hand went to Samuel like instinct. I thought the storm would cover our trail, she said. But he's got men. Bounty hunters. Mercenaries. He won't stop. Elias crossed the room, took the rifle off the wall, checked it. Slowly, steadily. You'll need to stay low, he said. No, you don't have to protect me. Just let me go. They won't hurt you if... They're not getting through that door, Elias said, voice low. Final. Mara looked at him, her eyes glassing with something between fear and wonder. Why, she asked. Why would you risk it? And Elias, standing in the doorway of a life he thought was over, looked at her with something like peace. Because I didn't last time. The knock didn't come. Not that night. Not the next morning either. But the air had changed. The silence around the cabin wasn't peace anymore. It was the kind that clung to your skin, sharp with waiting. Elias could feel it in the way the birds stopped singing before dawn, in the nervous twitch of his horse's ears, in the way Mara stood at the window holding Samuel close, like the world might crack open at any moment. He didn't ask her to move, didn't ask her to hide, because deep down he knew. It was already too late for that. That afternoon, while she nursed her ribs in silence, Elias dug out an old crate from beneath the floorboards, his wife Sarah's things. A few keepsakes, a Bible with pages soft from use. And at the bottom, wrapped in linen, her rifle. He handed it to Mara without a word. She stared at it, hands trembling. I haven't shot one of these since I was a girl. Then now's a good time to remember, Elias said. We may not get another. She looked up something unreadable in her green eyes. You think they'll kill us? Elias didn't lie. I think they've done worse. Mara nodded once. Then she stood. There's something else. Elias waited. She walked to the crib where Samuel lay sleeping, peeled back the quilt layer by layer until she reached a thin flannel pouch, stitched by hand, into the corner. She slid it open carefully, like it might bleed. Inside was a small black notebook, weather-stained, tied with string. His ledger, she whispered. Jebediah's. He kept everything written down, who bought how much they paid, what town they were from. Elias took the book gently, opened it. The first few pages looked like any trading log. Shipments of feed, deliveries of firewood. But then the handwriting shifted neater, colder, and the items became names. Initials, ages, weights, prices. And then one word that turned his stomach unmarked. Infants, Mara said softly, with no records, no parents. No questions. She reached for the baby again, as if his very presence needed protecting from the ink on those pages. Elias turned another page. There at the bottom he saw a name. Elise K., 23 years. Labor complications. Claimed. He stared at that word. Claimed. They made it look like she died in childbirth, Mara said. But I saw the bruises, the way she begged the night before. Elias closed the book slowly, then stood and placed it back in the flannel pouch. He didn't look at Mara when he said it. If this falls into the right hands, he goes to prison, she finished, or hangs. But that's why he'll never stop, she added, barely breathing. He knows what I took. He knows what I saw. If he finds me. If he finds this book, he won't. She looked at him, startled. How can you be sure? Elias crossed the room and lit the lantern, letting the light fall across the worn floorboards and the dusty table, the packed saddlebag near the door. Because if he comes here, Elias said, I'll stop him. And if he doesn't? Elias paused, then looked down at the baby. Then we ride. That night, they didn't sleep. Elias oiled the rifle, checked the windows. Mara sat by the crib humming something broken and soft. A tune no one had taught her, only grief could write. When the sound came, it wasn't loud. Just hoofbeats in the dark. Slow, measured, 4 riders again. Elias motioned for her to douse the lamp. The cabin fell into shadow. Outside, the riders dismounted their boots, crunching frozen grass. One of them laughed, quiet and mean. They didn't knock. They just circled. Mara pressed Samuel to her chest, eyes wide. Then a voice low and confident cut through the door like a blade. Evening, Mr. Mercer. We know she's in there. Elias stepped forward, rifle resting across his arms. She came here alone, the man continued. She took something that doesn't belong to her. Elias didn't reply. Return the woman. Return the child. We'll ride away peaceful. No one else has to bleed tonight. Elias moved to the window, peering through the curtain slit. He could make out their shapes, calm, loose in the shoulders, not nervous. They'd done this before. They think we'll give up easy, he muttered. Mara's whisper came from behind him. They won't leave until they've searched the place. No, Elias said. They won't. He looked down at his boots, then at the rifle in his hands. And he knew this wasn't a choice anymore. It hadn't been for days. Not since the river. Not since the baby reached for his coat with those trembling fingers. The woman and child sleeping in his home weren't strangers anymore. They were the last thing he'd ever protect. The first shot came not from Elias, but from outside. It shattered the window nearest the fireplace, sent glass across the floor like ice scattered by God's own hand. Mara screamed, curling herself around the baby, shielding him with her arms, her body. Elias didn't flinch. He ducked, low rifle in hand, eyes scanning shadows like he'd done 100 times before for wolves or rustlers. But this wasn't cattle they were after. This was blood. Last warning, Mercer, a voice barked from beyond the wall. Send her out, or we burn you out. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mara pressed her back to the far wall, clutching Samuel to her chest, his muffled cries, a knife twisting through the silence. The old rifle, Sarah's rifle, lay beside her, untouched. She wasn't ready? Not yet. Elias turned over the table, made a barricade. Then came the second shot. It tore through the kitchen shutter and buried itself in the wall above Mara's head. Wood-splintered dust fell like snow, and Elias felt something rise in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not raid. Resolve. He waited, counted the steps outside. 4 sets of boots, maybe 5. 1 to the right, close to the barn. 2 flanking either side. 1 stayed back, commanding. Professional? Then the voice again, lower this time. Calm. Too calm. You're outnumbered, Mercer. We've done this before. Just give us the girl. You don't owe her anything. Elias called back, voice hard. You'll have to come through me. The silence that followed was sharper than the gunfire. Then the front door exploded inward. A man rushed through, gun-raised face masked in burlap. Elias fired. The shot caught the attacker in the shoulder, spun him backward into the doorframe. He didn't get up. But another followed faster. Elias didn't have time to reload. He swung the butt of his rifle like a club, caught the man in the ribs. The two went down together in a tangle of limbs and fury. Elias was strong, but the man was younger, hungry, trained. They struggled across the cabin floor, knocking over chairs, crashing into the wood stove. Elias landed a blow to the side of the man's head, but took one to the jaw in return. His lips split. Blood mixed with ash. Elias, Mara cried. He couldn't answer. The man had a knife now, short, curved, wicked. Elias grabbed for the blade, caught it with his palm, felt it slice deep. He didn't let go. He'd let go once before. He wouldn't do it again. With a grunt, Elias shoved the attacker back, slammed him into the wall. The knife clattered to the floor. The man stumbled, stunned. That's when Mara moved. Still holding Samuel with one arm, she reached with the other, dragged Sarah's rifle across the floor. She couldn't aim. Her ribs screamed with each breath, but she could fire. And she did. The blast echoed through the cabin like thunder. The bullet missed, but not by much. It caught the lamp on the wall, bursting glass and flame. The room filled with sudden smoke and oil-fed fire. The attacker bolted, scrambling out the broken door into the night. But Elias didn't rise. He slumped against the wall, blood from his hand dripping onto the floor. He was breathing barely. His shirt torn, his face bruised, and one eye swelling shut. He looked tired. Not just from the fight, but from what it meant. Mara crawled toward him, baby still wailing in her arms. Elias, please. I'm all right, he whispered, though it sounded more like apology than truth. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. But the threat hadn't. Voices murmured. Footsteps moved. They were regrouping. They're not done, Mara said. No, Elias rasped. They're waiting to see what we do next. She looked around the cabin fire, climbing the curtains, smoke crawling up the rafters. Samuel wouldn't last long in here. Neither would Elias. Then came a voice, familiar, cruel. You got one more chance, Mercer. We torch the whole place next. You want to die in there with a whore and a stolen baby. Mara flinched. Elias, through cracked lips, muttered, Get ready to run. Mara grabbed his shirt. I'm not leaving you. He looked at her, then really looked. And despite the fire and the pain and the odds stacked to heaven, he smiled. I already left once, he said, and I've been dying ever since. Another voice shouted from outside, This is it, old man, time's up. Elias tried to stand. Couldn't. That's when Mara did something she'd never done before. She handed Samuel to him and picked up the rifle. The cabin burned slow, just one curtain, just one wall. But the smoke had begun to thicken, curling along the rafters like a noose made of ash. Mara stood in the middle of the chaos rifle, clutched tight in her hands, her body trembling from pain, exhaustion, and something else, certainty. The kind a woman gets when she knows she's out of choices. Elias sat slumped near the hearth, Samuel swaddled tight against his chest. He looked like every man who'd already given everything and was still willing to give more. I said, Come out, the voice barked from outside. Then a pause. Then, you've got 10 seconds before we come in blazing. Mara didn't wait. She limped to the window, flung open the warped wooden shutter, and shouted through the smoke. Jebediah Crane. The silence that answered was heavy. Then came a slower, more measured voice. Well now, seems the girl remembers my name. Elias stirred behind her, pushing himself up on one arm. "He's here." Mara didn't answer. She didn't need to. A figure emerged from the tree line, broad-shouldered, clean boots, despite the mud coat too fine for the filth he came from. His face, smooth-shaven, looked almost civilized if you didn't know what lived behind the eyes. Jebediah Crane stepped forward, smiling like he'd already won. "You always were too brave for your own good." "Mara," he said loud enough for her to hear. "But this is foolish. You think that cowboy can save you." Mara leveled the rifle. "I don't need saving." "Oh, sweetheart," he laughed, gesturing to the men flanking him. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and frankly, out of time." "Then come and take me," she said. Crane paused. His smile faded, because something had shifted. She wasn't pleading anymore. She was daring. Inside the cabin, Elias coughed hard blood staining his lips. But when he spoke, his voice was steel dragged across gravel. "She's under my protection." That stopped even Crane for a breath. "Is that what this is now?" he replied. "Some twisted love story you're gonna die for her, for a stolen baby that isn't even yours?" "No," Elias said, standing, somehow shoulders shaking. "I'll fight for her, because this time, I choose to." Crane narrowed his eyes. "Then you'll die for her." "I've died before," Elias said. "This time I'll die living." A beat passed. Then Crane spat on the ground and motioned to his men. "Burn it down." The gunfire came in waves. Windows shattered. Beams splintered. Smoke poured in like a tide. Elias fired first one shot clean and calm, dropping the man closest to the door. Mara moved beside him, shoulder to shoulder, her aim wild but defiant. She missed twice. Hit once. Enough to make the next man hesitate. Crane's men weren't used to resistance, especially not from a woman with cracked ribs and a man bleeding from 3 places. "They're pushing right," Elias said. "Stay low." A bullet tore through the wall behind them, spraying dirt and flame. The baby cried out a sharp, panicked wail. Mara turned. "Give him to me." "No," Elias said, eyes locked on the window. "You shoot, I carry." And then the cabin wall exploded. The impact threw them both back. Mara hit the table. Elias hit the ground, shielding Samuel with his arms. Dust choked the air. Heat surged like a second sun. And through it all, the sound of boots closer now. Charging. Mara forced herself up, shoulders screaming, breath ragged. She saw him, Crane, walking through the smoke like he belonged there, revolver-drawn eyes dead as winter. He raised the gun toward Elias, and Mara pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and Crane stumbled once, twice, but didn't fall. He turned to her, stunned, then angry. "Wrong choice," he hissed, stepping toward her. He never reached her, because Elias was already moving, bleeding, limping, but alive. He lunged rifle as club struck Crane in the face, then again, and again. The 2 men fell into the dirt, grappling in the wreckage, fists and fury. Mara screamed, reaching for another shell. Too slow. Crane rolled on top of Elias, knife drawn. Elias didn't reach for a weapon. He whispered something instead. "You'll never touch her again." Then a crack, loud, sharp, final. Crane froze. Blood bloomed from his chest. He fell back. Behind him stood Mara's smoke, curling from the barrel of Sarah's rifle. She had found the strength. The remaining men ran. They always do when the head of the snake goes limp. By dawn, the fire had died. The cabin stood half-burned but still upright. And so were they. Mara knelt beside Elias, wiped the blood from his cheek. "Stay with me," she whispered. He looked at her, not with fear, not with pain, but with something like peace. "You fought for me," he said. "You taught me how." Then the sun broke over the ridge, spilling gold through the smoke, through the broken windows, over a man who had once chosen death, and now for the first time in years, chose to live. 3 days later, they left the cabin behind. It still stood barely blackened walls, shattered windows, soaked in ash and memory. But the fire had taken what it needed, and left the rest for those who still had something to live for. Elias stood in the doorway one last time. The baby asleep against his chest, Mara beside him, bruised but upright. A survivor in every meaning of the word. The kind of woman no storm could ever drown again. The wagon was small, just big enough for the three of them and what little they could carry. A rifle, a cradle, a ledger sealed in oilcloth and tucked beneath the seat like a final truth, waiting for the right moment. "Where will we go?" Mara asked as they rolled past the burned fence line. Oregon Elias said, "Maybe farther, wherever people don't ask questions, wherever the boy can grow without looking over his shoulder." They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. The prairie stretched before them wide and gold, and the wind was soft for once, like a promise. Beside Elias, Mara leaned her head to his shoulder, one arm wrapped gently around his ribs. Samuel stirred in his sleep, then settled again like he knew for the first time in his short life that he was truly safe. And somewhere along that endless stretch of road, Elias realized something simple. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't angry or haunted or half dead. He was beginning. Life doesn't always give us second chances. But when it does, they never come wrapped in perfection. They come battered and breathless, like a woman in the mud, holding a child that's not hers. They come as a test, asking not what you're willing to lose, but what you're willing to protect. If you've ever had to start over, if you've ever chosen to love when it was easier to walk away, then this story was for you. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done standing in that cabin with nothing left but a rifle, a child, and one final choice? And if this story touched something quiet inside you, something still healing, subscribe to Wild West Soul, because out here, every story is a step toward home. And home is where you finally let your heart grow back.